Okay. As I was saying, I tend to, if I'm going to outline or something like this, I tend to use a brush rather than a pencil. I'm more accurate with a brush than I am with a pencil. One of my favorite little demonstrations to do when I first start the semester, because people can't believe I use a great big brush to paint jewelry. That's my name. So you can paint very tiny and fine with one of these. So, and I don't think I need to really paint the whole front view here. Just an indication of what it is we're trying to do, which is a flat top. Okay. So, the light in rendering is always coming from the upper left-hand corner. All right. So, painting a flat surface. I'm going to start with white metal. You begin with a neutral gray. A neutral gray that is just neutral tint and white. Looks like that.
Is that what you made the outline in the neutral gray too?
I had a little brown mixed in, but yeah. So I had to decide if I was going to do it in gold or not. Now, a couple of things to know about gouache. Such fun paint. It dries a different color than it is when it's wet. So you have to gauge with experience what that does. Also, you must not touch the work again until it's dry. So that's step number one. I can't touch that until it's dry. If I do, I'll be working wet into wet, and what that will do is it'll start to peel up the paint underneath, and you'll end up with holes in your artwork. So while I'm waiting for that one to dry, I will come in here and do the one next to it. Another circle. This one to convey a flat top with a rounded corner. Do this in gold. The yellow metal base color for us is yellow ochre, straight from the tube. No mixing required. Okay, by now the neutral tint, the white metal, will be dry. The next thing I'm going to do is you work from middle out. So there are 5 values in this process. There's middle tone, light, dark, highlight, core shadow. And actually the order I paint them in, I should say them in that order. Middle tone, shade, light, core shadow, highlight. So I actually start in the middle and then I go a step to the dark, a step to the light, another step to the darkest, another step to the lightest. Okay? So, I will do the shaded area, which will be, once again, neutral tint and white, but more neutral tint than last time, so that it's a little bit darker. You want it dark enough that it stands out clearly against the first color. Okay? And I'm going to paint this as a diagonal bar. This is shorthand for flat reflections when you're painting metal and jewelry, because the piece has no real form. There's no real sculptural quality to it. Where you put these bands on a flat piece is entirely up to you, actually. I'll do a couple. Try not to make them the same thickness. Try and keep them parallel. These two are not parallel, but that's okay. I've got plenty of other values to go before I'm finished, so I can clean it up with other values. Value. When I say value, what do I mean? Yeah, a level of dark and light. Hue, when you're talking about color, hue means which color. Value means lightness or darkness. So for the yellow, I mix a little bit of Van Dyke brown, our darkest earth color, into the yellow ochre. Once again, what I'm looking for is enough of a difference that it stands out well against the middle tone, but not so stark that I can't go any darker. This is frankly leaning towards being too dark, but that's all right. Notice how this 45 doesn't match that 45. That's also fine, unless they're on the same piece. If you have two different elevations that are flat on the same piece, the diagonals have to match, because it's the same light hitting the same surface. But other than that, no. And I'll do a second laying here. And I should let those dry, but I'm not going to, because I'm not going to touch the same spot. I'm going to go back into the white metal and mix my light color. My light color is almost pure white. It's got a little bit of neutral tint. It doesn't take a lot. But I have to leave enough of a gray that white still looks different compared to it. So if it's too dark to where the white doesn't look white next to it, then it's not, I went too light. Okay, I'm going to use this as an opportunity to kind of straighten up some of the mistakes that I made. And there isn't a rule here. I can put these bands however I want. The only rule is the one that's done it better look like metal. I can tell you that I try not to put a lighter color up in this corner, because I'm going to want to put a crisp highlight around that edge. And if it's already quite light, the hard highlight's not going to show. For the yellow, the light color is Permanent Yellow Deep, our taxi cab yellow, our warm yellow, with Pro White. Don't put too much white in it or it becomes chalky, almost peachy in color. You want it to still have a lot of warmth, a lot of nice yellow to it. What I'm doing here is a little bit dangerous. You don't want your bands to look zebra stripe. You don't want them to be the same thickness. And splitting this almost gave me two the same thickness, which is a little dangerous. I will correct that by coming in and thinning out the second one. I'm not getting a lot of difference in value. I won't be able to appraise that for sure until the paint dries, because once again it dries a different value than when it goes on. So I'm watching it. And actually there's a decent range of value there. I'm going to go a little bit lighter though. How many bands you end up with depends on the size. If you have a big area, actually just don't ever do too many. If you do a lot of bands, it looks funny. It really does look like zebra stripes. Get by with as few as you can. I've actually done a little more than I have to convey the form here, that it's flat. Okay, the next color up is what we call a core shadow, C-O-R-E, shadow. It's the darkest color. On the white metal, that'll simply be neutral tint straight from the tube. And what should happen when I put this in is that the whole piece gets lighter, because painting in color is all a matter of contrast. Light compared to what becomes the question. And that really dark color makes the rest of it lighten up. For the yellow, the darkest color, the core shadow, is straight Van Dyke brown. Okay. And now it's time for highlight. On the white metal, the highlight's white. And it may take a couple of coats for the white to get really opaque. Once again, I'm not going to want to put a lot of this white up here, because there's a highlight I want to put up there that's separate from this. Starting like flat metal, right? The yellow, the highlight, is cadmium lemon, the lemon yellow, and white. Quite a bit of white. The reason we use the lemon yellow, and when you buy it this week, you'll find out it's $20 a tube. It's very expensive paint. The reason that I stick with it is because it's a carcinogen and it might kill you before you're 30. That's a plus. The other reason I do it is because it's the strongest yellow money can buy. And you want that, because you want to go very, very light and still have it be very intense. Cadmiums are beautiful colors. They are very toxic. Don't eat them. But they're really, really brilliant. And you can keep adding white, and the colors still stay strong. And all of the other lemon yellow colors, pigments, are really weak. If you even touch them with white, they disappear. So I try and use cheap pigments for the purpose, for the sanctity of your pocketbook, but this one I can't. We got to have a good cold yellow. And I built a lot of white into that mix. And it's still very yellow. Okay. Now the last step to these is to actually give them their form from the front view. The white metal piece has a square hard corner. To indicate that square hard corner, when you work back and forth from yellow to white, it's a problem because you get yellow on that paintbrush, especially cadmium yellow. And every time you touch the white with it, you end up with pale butter yellow. Okay. By the way, I want you to look at that brush. Can you see it? Notice how you can see every hair of the brush pretty much, but you can't see the color of the brush. That's about how thick you want your paint to be. You want it to be thick enough that the color masks the color of the hair, but the paint should still be watery enough, thin enough, that you can still see the texture of the hair through it. If you can't see the texture of the hair, if it looks like an ice cream cone, you're in danger. And if you see the color of the hair through it, then you're going to be too transparent and it's just not going to cover. What I want to do is I want to come in along this edge and add a hard white highlight. Now while I was talking to you, the paint dried on my brush. Gouache dries very fast, so it stopped flowing. When you're trying to paint a tiny little line, that's not going to work. You'll see that you can't see it in the camera, but I often reach up and touch my hand with my other hand. That's a bench technique, actually. I learned that from a master wax carver. Just having the two hands in contact with each other increases your stability. Now, if I take this all the way over the edge of that line to the paper beyond, I will have lost the outline of my piece altogether, which I don't want to do. If I want to, I can pick up a little bit over here, but I got to be very careful. Now you can feel a hard edge on that. For the rounded dome, the rounded flat piece, I'm going to mix the shade color. That's yellow ochre with a little bit of Van Dyke brown. I'm going to paint all the way around the piece. This distance right here, guys, that's the thickness of the rounded corner. So that's how far in I want to paint with this color. very hard to do for the camera. I'm a person who spins my drawing all the time when I'm working on it. You see me do it up at the front table. I spin, spin, spin. I can't spin, spin, spin while I'm doing this. I get one angle and I got to adjust my wrist to fit. My wrist isn't that friendly. But it's going okay. Like so. I'll take a little bit of the core color, which is just the burnt umber. Not burnt umber, I'm sorry, Van Dyke brown. Place a thin stroke along that edge. Then I'll make my highlight, my pale lemon. And I'll come along this edge. And I want to let this get fairly full, comparatively speaking. I don't want the little razor edge line that I have on the square corner. I want it to be chunky, like that. Now I'm going to bounce a little bit of light around the rim. So I'll come over here and I'll pick up a little bit in here. Maybe pick up a little bit over here. And I'll get some of my medium yellow. My light yellow, the taxi cab yellow and white. Permanent yellow deep. And I'll glance some of that in here as well. And if I think I can get away with it, I'll do a little reflected light along this rim. But on something this size, I don't think it'll even matter. There. Let me see what you're seeing. Yeah, looks a lot rougher up there than it does over here. Anybody have a X-Acto knife with them? No one's carrying weapons. Where do you think you go to school? Hampton. When it comes to, I think I returned it. I borrowed the students. And then foolishly gave it back to her. When you work on Opalux, you can erase. And the way you would erase those kind of tawdry edges that we have going on there is you would come in with a razor knife and the tip of the knife and you can just scrape it. It'll come right off. If you don't have that, you can take a damp brush and you can come back in and just soften some of the Harries. Like I said, when I can't rotate the paper around, it's hard to have the brush tip follow where I want it to go. You always want your brush to follow the form. And when I'm doing this, I'm going wrist turn, wrist turn, wrist turn. And it's hard. Before I do anything else, come take a look at this actual size. Because it's a very different experience. Actual size. Well, I can pass. No, I can't pass. Yeah, I can pass it around, but I'm not going to. I don't want to do it. It tightens up a little, doesn't it? Okay? So, we're running out of time. So I'm going to have to pick up speed. The next two forms are a low dome and a high dome. They are over here. I'll do a low dome in white metal, high dome in yellow. I think the medium gray I started with on the flat piece was a little too dark, so I'll make it a little lighter on this one. It's interesting, in the advanced rendering class right now, the 233 course, we only work on opaque paper. And on opaque paper, your colors are very different. You have a lot different sense of contrast. Okay. Let's move that out of the way. Thank you. Okay, so. See, I'm trying to have that brush stroke follow the form. I did not draw the outline, which was very bold of me, bordering on foolish. So I'll try and do that now that I've covered half of it up. Favorite jewelry phrase? Careful is slow. No, slow is careful, and careful is fast. I'm running out of time, so I got in a hurry and started to thump this in. And in so doing, made my job a lot more difficult. But there's a leading edge to that brush and a heel to that brush. And if that heel jumps out, you get this strange little snag. So you have to be always mindful of the direction your brush is moving in, where the heel, where the toe is, so that you get predictable results. Outline the yellow metal one first, because I'm smarter than I was a minute ago. One way to get more control when you're doing something delicate line work like this is to try and do complementary, like I'm doing opposite sides, because they're similar wrist actions. And my wrist still remembers the other side. It's okay to rehearse a brush stroke. Or a pencil stroke, for that matter. Like so. How I normally do this is I have it printed out. This is a computer file, and I have it printed onto the Opalux. And then I don't have to go through that stage, that step. So these are dome forms. One's a low dome, one's a high dome. And the main difference between the two is that the features are going to stay closer to the edge on the low dome and come more to the center on the high dome. So starting with my shade color on the low dome. I'll bring a crescent. I don't want to get right up on the edge. I want to leave a nice space. And I'll pick some of this up over here as well, a little bit from the edge. And since I don't intend to paint into the same area, I can keep going. I mustn't try and work into wet paint, so I have to stay well clear of anywhere where the paint is wet. Once again, this is just neutral tint with a fair amount of white mixed in. And this I will keep also out towards the edge. And I'm going to make kind of a yin-yang form, a paisley shape. I'm going to use some of this to also pick up a reflected light on this side. Reflected light is light that's not coming directly from the light source. It's light that's bouncing off of the walls and the floor and other objects in the room. In jewelry, you would often assume it's bouncing off the table because the jewelry is laying on a table, for example. Like that. I'm going to go the same 2 steps with the yellow metal piece. For that I need yellow ochre and Van Dyke brown. Here I'm going to actually let this crescent step farther away from the edge. I'm going to let it take up a little more room as well. And the same thing with this like secondary shadow up here. I'm going to let it stay a little further away from the edge. And the light white and the taxi cab yellow. Same thing, this paisley form. The paisley form is going to be much closer in to that shaded portion. It's going down a little transparent. That could be because I have too much water in the paint, or it could be that yellow ochre is not fully dry. Paint that's slightly wet will just soak up new color like a sponge. Going to go ahead and bring in an accent line here. Much the same way as I did on the flat metal. And I'll pick up a reflected light here. I'm actually going to break that a little bit, and then I'll pick up a reflected light under here. And already you should start to feel the difference between a low dome and a high dome. That low dome feels flatter. And this definitely feels fuller. Okay, we are almost out of time. If you could spare me 2 more minutes, I can complete these. Core shadow on the white metal. Neutral tint, nothing else. The core shadow on a dome surface comes up closer to the light side, to the light source, than the shaded side. You do not need a lot of this, but you've got to have some. If you don't have black, you can't have white. I'll do the same thing with the Van Dyke brown in the high dome. I can let this get a little fuller on the high dome. That paint's a little dry, and so it's going on scratchy with less control than I would like. Not something you would be aware of, but I'm letting you know what it feels like to be painting this. Okay, highlights. Finishing these up. On the low dome, it's just white. And it will come up here towards the edge. And it will be kind of tubular. I usually do a couple. And maybe a smaller one over in here. And to take out the reflected light edge. There's the low dome. High dome is the lemon yellow and white. The highlight here goes almost in the middle, and it is round. Once again, I'll have a secondary one here. This is tricky because I'm painting fast, and to paint fast, I have to paint opaque. And to paint opaque, the paint is much thicker on my brush than it should be, because I have to get it in one pass. Do not try that at home. Make 2 passes if you have to. I'll catch a little reflected light along the outer rim here, and a fairly good swath of reflected light on the bottom. Not bad. That main reflection, that main highlight is still soaking into the color underneath, because it's not dry. But there you go. Okay? So, can you see the difference between the two? Can you? Yeah, you can feel the form. You are sculpting with a brush when you render. So you can convey to your client what the finished form will be. Okay? So, I'm going to go ahead and stop this video.